sunny
Okay.
day, 21 degrees. Very nice day. Yeah.
Okay, I think we are live. Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Peacemaker 360 community. Thank you for those who, I can see quite a few people tuning in live onto our broadcast. On the call today, we have with me Alexander. Alexander's calling in from Amsterdam. Hi, Alexander.
Hi.
And we also have Sarah. Sarah is calling in from North America, from Illinois. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Jessica. Hi, Alex.
Hello. Great. And it looks like, just to give some background context to our viewers, we had two other members who are supposed to be joining us in today, Dumi and Cedric. Cedric might be calling in from Cameroon, and Dumi from Serbia. So let's keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully they can join us in soon. And as you can see today in my different background, it is dark in Canberra, Australia. It is currently 8:20 p.m. And for those of you who've been following us on the Peacemaker 360 live streaming platform, you'd be familiar. My name is Jessica. I'm the host for today. And we also have Christian. Christian, who is the founder of Peacemaker 360, and he's actually doing the teching to make this platform possible for us to all communicate today. So I'll just also make a warm welcome to our audience. And during this call today, feel free to write in any comments or questions that you have. And I'll make sure that we do spend 10 minutes towards the end tuning into your questions, and Christian will broadcast them with us. But before we go ahead and start, I heard the news that's happening in Sri Lanka at the moment. So we'd just like to send our commemoration to our fellows in Sri Lanka and have a moment of silence for those fellows who've passed away in the shootings. And for everyone else who's celebrating today, Easter, happy Easter to you all. And if not, I hope you're having a good break. So today on our call, we have our hot topic, which is basically about the International Day for the Right to Truth concerning gross human rights violations and for the dignity of victims. And that day is commemorated on the 24th of March since its adoption as a UN resolution in late 2010. This day actually pays tribute to the life of Oscar Romero El Salvador, who devoted his life to protecting human rights, denouncing violations of the most vulnerable populations in his community, to which he was unfortunately assassinated during a public mass. Romero's case is an example of how no one was convicted for his political crime, or if you want to call it crimes against humanity, which later on led to investigations by the United Nations, which then created the Truth Commission for it. So today in this segment, we will delve into the legal framework and recourse mechanisms behind the right to truth concerning gross human rights violations and for the dignity of victims. We will look to our panelists to really understand what is happening or has happened in the space within their nations or any other countries that you can be exposed to. So without further ado, let's head over to our panelists and for a more formal introduction, basically to hear who you are, where you're calling from, and what current work or project engagement you're involved in, whether that's in the human rights or peace building space, or anything that's promoting the importance to the right to truth and justice. So let's head over to Sarah first.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. I'm based in Indiana at the University of Notre Dame. I work as a professor at the Egg Institute for Global Health. I also work at AIDS Free World as a research and legal officer, primarily on work in the Gambia, which I'll talk about a little bit today. My work kind of traverses both human rights and peace and truth-telling in a sense. And I can go in a little bit more detail about that a little bit later on. But yes, primarily I teach global health and human rights at Notre Dame, and I work as a legal research officer at AIDS Free World.
Amazing. Great to have you here. Thanks for being here, Sarah. And Alexander, over to you.
Yes, I am Alexander. I am from Colombia, and I have been in the Netherlands for almost 1 year. And during this last year, I have been the promoter of the opening investigation before the International Criminal Court of Justice here in The Hague, in The Hague. And the reason of this activism before the court is to open a file of systematic assassinations of human rights defenders in Colombia since the last 2 years. And this activism combines legal actions, but also political movements or the creation of a community of extraterritorial victims who has been living in exile, or we call it vluchtelingen, but in English is refugees from the Colombian conflict in Europe. And so that's the frame of actions that I have been involved last year.
Great. Lovely to have you on, Alexander, and keep up the great work that you're doing at the moment in Amsterdam. So we'll delve further into that, but it's great that we have our panelists from a legal background, so that's amazing. I guess you'll have a lot to comment about the conventions and the legal international framework behind it. So let's look a little bit about what's the legal founding behind this day. Basically, the international framework is based on the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance that came through in 2006. According to that convention, victims have the right to know the truth regarding the circumstances of enforced disappearances and the progress results of an investigation, and the fate or whereabouts and circumstances of the disappeared or missing persons, and the identification of the perpetrators. Obviously, that's for the nations who are signatories to it and who've ratified that within their national legislation. And what's the mechanism to go to that convention? Well, as I said, for those states that have signed or ratified to the convention obliges states to investigate cases of enforced disappearances, requiring any interested persons to know the concrete steps taken to clarify the fate or the whereabouts of those disappeared persons. So the responsibility is on the state. The working group to the convention also asserts recourse in national legislation to review a refusal to provide information by the state authority on missing persons. So that's an obligation that the state itself that is signed to the convention must also provide that recourse for people if they want to find out information about missing persons. The convention recognizes as well that the right to know the truth about the circumstances of the disappearance of people is not absolute. It's not an absolute right. In some cases, it has been seen that hiding parts of the truth has been chosen by the country in order to facilitate reconciliation within the country. Nevertheless, it is recalled that states do have an obligation to bring any persons alleged to have perpetrated an enforced disappearance to justice. That's also still within domestic law. All right, so against this international framework, let's go to our panelists to really understand. I want to hear your general thoughts, particularly on whether you're familiar with any direct application of this convention, whether within your country, where you're currently staying, or elsewhere. Sarah, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I know that it's been most widely applied, or the right to truth as you've just described it, with the state having the responsibility to expose the truth of past crimes, has happened within the framework of the Inter-American human rights system. I know in 1998 that in a report against Chile, the Inter-American Commission recognized that every society has the inalienable right to know the truth about past events, as well as the motives and circumstances in which they were committed. I know that the Human Rights Council adopted a resolution on the right to truth and called upon states to take a number of steps to facilitate efforts. From the Zimbabwean context, which is where I come from, the work I do is not primarily on that, but I know currently there's a National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, which was set up to look into the truth about past human rights atrocities. While the body exists and has existed for a number of years, sadly, it hasn't really done much to meet the needs of the society to hear the truth of past events. One such cry has been for victims of a genocide that took place in Matabele land called Gukurahundi. And the people from that region have been calling for truth. They've been calling for an investigation. There was even a report that was commissioned shortly after the commission of these crimes and these killings in the 80s, but that report has never been made public. So I think in situations like that, some states give the impression of wanting to make steps to tell the truth and to commit to the right to truth, but really they only go so far and don't really fulfill what the victims' families require, which is access to these public records. They go and delve into the truth, but they stop short of making those records available. Contrast that with the Gambia, where I am doing some work now. They have their Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, which has been actively digging into what happened during the dictatorship of former President Yahya Jammeh. They've had public hearings that are live broadcast on televisions where even people who have perpetrated abuses have been talking about how some killings were enacted, who ordered those killings. Recently, there was a mass grave that was dug up where some victims' families were able to see the remains of their loved ones. So the political will with respect to the right to truth is very important. And I think it's the role of activists to rally behind victims to make sure that promises to tell the truth by governments are carried out in full and fulfilled, and done so in a manner that is transparent.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. You've raised a few points, important points. Alexander, do you have anything to comment on what Sarah just said?
Yes. What is the if I can ask, what is the reason why the conflict in Zimbabwe? It was, we can say, it was the root of this violence. That's my question.
Yeah, so it was just post the independence war, when Zimbabwe had just become newly independent from colonial rule. There was reported, according to the government, there was reported dissident activity to try and destabilize the new government, because Zimbabwe shares a border with South Africa, and in the 1980s, South Africa was still under apartheid. So the government viewed the group, the tribal group that lives within this Matabeleland region, as the source of a lot of dissident activity. So they deployed the army to deal with dissidents, but then the result was the killing of around an estimated 20,000 civilians, including women, including children, in mass graves. So the community, understandably, of the Ndebele people still wants to understand and have that recognition that what happened, those killings, were not about dissidents that were trying to destabilize the country and targeted attacks against armed dissidents, but it was really an attack against an identifiable civilian population. And, you know, the government, after the killings, which ended, I would say they were between roughly 1985 and 1987, they commissioned they set up a commission, as governments often do when they're trying to, show that, well, we are human rights oriented. They set up a commission called the Dumbuchena Commission. It collected all the evidence. A report was prepared, but up to now, that report has never been released or seen. Luckily, civil society organizations such as the Catholic Commission for Justice and Peace collected testimony of survivors, collected testimony of victims' families, and were able to give a picture of what happened, a picture of issues of rape, issues of men being told to dig their own graves before they're shot and subsequently buried, and these attacks that were basically on civilians. But to this day, talking about it was a little bit more taboo, but people are still trying to talk about it now and trying to remind the government of the responsibility to let people know what happened and to make public those findings, and more importantly, to offer apology, recognition, and some form of reparations to the communities that were affected, because children were orphaned, some were unable to get birth certificates, some were unable to therefore, if you can't get your identity document, you can't write exams, your life basically stops. Some were not able to get death certificates, so, not to go on, but in a snapshot, that's really what it was about.
Yeah.
Sarah, what's the justification behind not making the records public? So we understand that the government took its time to investigate and put all those financial resources. What is the justification that they're giving the Zimbabwe public?
Well, the government has said that they're happy for people to talk about the issue now. So in a way, the lid has been lifted off it. Before, a lot of activists that would talk about it or would create artistic productions about it, such as theater productions, would be arrested. But apparently they cannot find the report. That's where things are now. The government said they're looking for the report. I think the most recent news report I saw said that they were trying to find where that commission report was. So
okay, I understand. So it's a bit different. So when you have a Truth and Justice Commission, I don't know, like the jurisdiction that they run under is a bit different. But as I mentioned here in this particular convention, if you want to seek recourse or basically the state can decide, yes, I want to investigate, but I don't want to disclose or release the truth. So under this specific convention, that's possible. But I'm understanding that's completely different context. It depends on the jurisdiction that Zimbabwe was created under. Alexander, from your perspective, have you experienced something under the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, that convention, or any other restorative type justice modalities?
Well, in Colombia, we are talking about a conflict of almost 70 years. And this conflict, the root of this conflict basically has been, or it can be framed by saying that the government has never experienced a dictatorship, of military dictatorship. So we are proud sometimes to say that we have a democracy, very old democracy. But the thing is this, the government during the last 70 years have been offering all the natural sources to transnational companies. And in order to make it this real, the military force of the country has been becoming as a repressive force against people in the rural areas, and they have armed themselves in the forms of guerrillas. And during the last 70 years, these military violence have ended in 80,000 of people who never know where they are. So we are talking about maybe the most big number of disappeared persons in Latin America, and it's quite very big amounts of people, families, and cases that are not legally, there is not a legal answer to that. And it's the same like was saying Sarah, It's people who are really not having a place in society because of these, of course. And just a few years ago, thanks to the International Criminal Court participation with the national justice, was the possibility to create a special jurisdiction for peace. That's how we call it, but it's exactly in the same direction of a true commission, like in South Africa and other countries, which means to make possible the transition of uh, transitional justice for perpetrators and victims. So the result of this nowadays is this jurisdiction of peace that has been created is officially working. The current government is making everything difficult to make it happen in reality because the government is not giving the money they need to get through the testimonies, get through the field, and find uh, the stories to find where are these people or what happened to these people. So in this sense, I just would say that what I know about this process is more related with the participation of the International Criminal Court and the Statute of Rome, we can say, and how through this we have been given a shape of our own jurisdiction in Colombia to find out how to solve these thousands of cases of disappeared people in Colombia. Yeah.
Alexander, so you were referring to the ICC's jurisdiction in order to really investigate those cases. What about in terms of Colombia? Are you aware if Colombia has signed and ratified the Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances?
Yes, I think Colombia has signed this convention, and of course also the Statute of Rome, and I think, but I am now more informed about what is happening in relation with the ICC. I'm not very well informed with the convention of the international Inter-American system of human rights. That I'm confused with the Spanish name, but yeah, it's the Convention of Human Rights in Inter-American Convention Rights. I think is the name in English. But I'm not well informed of how it is in this sense, the progress of my country in this convention.
Okay. So, to both of you, why do you personally believe or think that the truth to right is important in a country context that's coming out of civil war or that has faced gross human rights violations?
Yeah.
Sarah, would you like to go first? Alexandra, yeah.
Well,
over to you.
The truth has the power of revealing how the crimes against humanity are such big and are such complex events where almost every part of society in almost every segment, every group of civil society and government and companies and military forces and almost every part of society participate indirectly or directly in creating this environment of aggressions to civil people, to human rights defender. So in a way of saying that the criminal law, or we can say the ordinary criminal law in our countries, are not efficient to capture this complex creation of crimes. So, and that's why I'm very convinced that the Statute of Rome is maybe one of the most impressive conventions in order to comprehend, to understand that these kind of crimes deserve a special jurisdiction, deserve a special treatment, because are most of them crimes that are very effective. You know, it's like the criminal organizations that are formed around these crimes works in a very incredible way, in a very efficient way, and sometimes national jurisdictions are just inefficient, are not possible to prosecute uh, these crimes. So then that's why truth, in a way, uh, is like the most effective way to destroy the power that gives the power of all these organizations or all these actors to create crime. So in other words, truth is for me, and according my own convictions, and is the only powerful way to destroy and stop these kind of crimes.
Yeah, so I think the truth is important not just for the victims' families, but I think in some cases, if we look at the truth more broadly and not just within the context of enforced disappearances, but even within the context of gross human rights violations, it's also important for the victims, an acknowledgement of their victimhood, an acknowledgement that a wrong was done against them. I think the truth is step one in ending impunity. As Alexander alluded to, if you don't talk about it, if you don't acknowledge the truth that someone was responsible for a gross human rights violation, then impunity reigns. Whether the truth leads to a prosecution or it leads to some kind of public apology or some other censure that society gets its pound of flesh, if you don't have the truth, you have impunity in all circumstances. So I think the truth is important also as a way to remind society how they got there, right? How did we get to this place where tens of thousands of people were killed, and I suppose nobody could do anything to stop it, or those that tried were also subsequently killed? How did we allow this particular institution, whether it's state security forces, whether it's military junta, whatever it is, how did we get to this place? So I think it helps a country to move forward at the micro level. In communities, it helps people to move forward. At the macro level, as a nation, it helps them to deal with the past and, where possible, put in place measures for non-repetition. And I would refer back to what's happening in the Gambia now, where there's discussions of all these human rights violations that took place. And one of the central pieces that they're also now talking about is actually the false HIV cure, the fraudulent HIV cure by President Yahya Jammeh, where people living with HIV were adversely affected by what he did. So an acknowledgement of how did we allow this political power to translate into a dictatorship that reigned over the health of people and led to some deaths and led to adverse health effects for people. How did we allow that to happen? And how can we make sure that that doesn't happen again, and recognize that even there are some special groups that need protection that may not be immediately within our range of vision as traditional human rights lawyers, activists, and people in that field of trying to protect human rights and also advance the fight against impunity. So, to sum it up, it's those three things. It's ending impunity, acknowledgement and recognition of victimhood, and a way in which to avoid repetition. Those, I think, are the central issues of why it's important, not just for the victims and their families, but just for society as a whole.
Yeah. Thanks for summarizing it in that way. As you said, acknowledging it is the first step, which is important for the society in order to create a new narrative for itself to build its new story down the track. But first step is to acknowledge the wrongs of what's happened. I'm just going to touch base a little bit about restorative justice, even though we sort of alluded to it. So restorative justice to our audience is a bit different from retributive justice. Restorative justice have been applied into a country's transitional justice processes, mainly to discover and reveal the past occasion wrongdoings by a government or non-state actors in the hope of resolving conflict or miscarriages of justice left over from the past. And there's quite a few examples. A few of them can be seen in the South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, through which South Africa's apartheid ended. There's also the Commission on the Truth for El Salvador, which you might be familiar with. The Nuremberg Trials, Sierra Leone's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, just to name a few. And Special Tribunal for Lebanon, shout out to them. But just firstly, I just want to see, can one of you give a simplified explanation to our viewers on what restorative justice is?
So my understanding of restorative justice is processes that happen in a community or at the national level to begin to restore broken relationships, to begin to rebuild the lives and restore the lives and the dignity and the humanity of those that were harmed. And in a sense, even the dignity of those that perpetrated the harm, right? If you think about it in the context of the Rwandan genocide, the genocideers, they had their dignity impaired because of what they did, because of the inhuman acts that they perpetrated. And it was in communities where neighbors killed their neighbors or raped their neighbors or mutilated their neighbors. And there was this need to, how do we knit back the fabric of a society that's been ripped apart by the actions of people that previously lived together in harmony, or, well, to a certain extent in harmony and in community with one another. So to restore what's been broken, the fabric that's been broken of society, and also of victims' lives and the society itself.
Okay,
Yeah,
so Alexander, go ahead.
I was just also thinking about the image of restoring a fabric, and it's exactly the same metaphor we use to talk about what is happening now in Colombia, or what we want start to happen in Colombia, because it's this broken fabric or broken social fabric which need to be restored. And this, of course, is not possible to make it only through the paper of law or a public policy that is written and published by someone. The truth that we have found out in Colombia is that this restoring process has take place in the field, in the in communities, and that's what we call social leaders. That's the work of these people has been doing the last 2 years in Colombia, trying to go to communities and start face to face to do this with militaries, ex-combatants, people from the rural areas, people from politics, and doing this that is very conflictive, because we are talking about a long conflict. It's what now we are really concerned, because they are now being killed. We have now more than 500 of them in 2 years. So I would say just that in a way, and that's ironic, that people who is trying to make this social fabric restored again are target, like danger people in a way. They are not armed or something. They don't have, their only arm is just this willing to make peace come true. But that's what happened in the Colombian context. These people are being systematically assassinated.
Mm.
Yeah.
So based on this description of restoring the social fabric and building the social harmony in a society, is it important to punish the perpetrators? Like, is there an element of punishment or retribution essential besides acknowledging what happened? What are your
Sorry,
takes on that?
Jessica, before Alex asked that question, I just wanted to find out from him, why does he think that the people that are trying to work together to restore the fabric are being assassinated? One would think that all of Colombia would be welcoming any kind of restoration, right? So I'm just curious to know.
Yeah, and that's exactly the question that we are trying to find out as a country, because the signs or the messages that we are receiving from the majority of the population is that they are really agreeing that the option to restore the country is through the military action. So, and when you find out how is that possible that most of the people in Colombia are more familiar with this kind of thinking, and you find then all this work that has been led by some politicians, that they are feeding a discourse of saying, yes, peace is not really a policy. What the policy successful should be is the policy of security, the policy
Mm.
of, and all this discourse that we find in, you know, Trump and all these big leaders. We also have it in Colombia. And unfortunately, the result of this uh, image of social workers or social leaders is that they are then defending the communist ideals, or they are now guerrillas but without arms, and then and all these discourses make them targeted, and we cannot stop it. Every single week we have two or three of them killed in indigenous communities, in rural areas communities, and that's exactly why we are so worried, because they are the people who are trying to make this agreement coming true in the territories. So yeah.
Um,
To answer your
Sarah.
question, Jessica, sorry, about whether or not did you say, are we punishing the perpetrators and is there a problem there, or what was your
Yeah,
question?
so is it essential, is punishing and retributive justice an important component of restorative justice? So do you have to punish the perpetrators for all the crimes they've committed, or do you believe pardons and concessions to perpetrators of atrocities is okay and permissible to move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the decision to pardon or to forgive within the context of restorative justice should really rest with the victim. Who has experienced the harm more personally than the victim, right? Who has been carrying the grief of the violation more than the victim or the victim's family? I know sometimes governments have to make these decisions to give pardons, either because the justice system itself would be completely overrun and overwhelmed if they had to deal with all the perpetrators. But I think it's a very difficult question that each state must decide, but in consultation with victims. I think it becomes problematic when the state decides wholesale that we take it upon ourselves that the best way to do this is to just pardon all the people. And if pardon is going to be considered, well, what other forms of punishment, in quotes, could there be? What other forms of, I guess, a pound of flesh, to put it in another way? Does it mean that if you are going to get a pardon, you have to say everything that you did and why you did it and reveal where it came from? Does it mean you have to show a mass grave if you were part of a massacre? Does it mean you have to reveal where you took someone's loved one or what you did to someone's loved one, their end? But I think it cannot just be pardon without some form of act upon the part of the perpetrator, and certainly without eliciting the views of the victims involved, because then it just becomes a slap in the face.
Yeah.
Alexander?
That's just also a big discussion now in Colombia, because perpetrators uh, are, in a way, not only demanding transitional justice, but also they are demanding political voice, because the nature of the conflict in Colombia has been, has a very important part of this conflict has been political. So it's been really challenging to understand that some of these perpetrators who are now facing justice or transitioning justice, at the same time they are having a political voice, and it makes then to the other part of society, which has been more against guerrillas, or most against these groups that have been using arms to defend rights. It's very hard for them to hear their political views or statements. So, in this sense, that what I can the question from the Colombian case is, well, not only they are getting to the transitional justice and sometimes negotiating punishment, but at the same time having a political voice and participation. So that's making it even more complicated.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I'm just going to put a question to you, Alexander. There's a question from our audience. The question comes from Students Against Violence group, and it says, thank you, Alexander, for sharing about the assassinations of social leaders in Colombia. Quite sad that this has been going on for a long time. How has your recent campaign in The Hague helped to mobilize the international community in this issue?
Yeah, it was a beautiful experience because it takes 1 year to go abroad all Europe to invite Colombian communities that are also worried about this issue. And at the end, the 5th of April, all of these organizations come to The Hague, and we were almost thousands of Colombians walking from the embassy of Colombia as an action to say to Colombia that the diplomacy, official diplomacy in Colombia has been insufficient, has been not really the work they have to do, is to reveal this humanitarian crisis. And then we walked from the embassy of Colombia to the ICC, and this action was very, maybe the biggest mobilization of Colombians in Europe in the history, and also was a very beautiful moment for Colombians and victims that are living abroad to find each other, to meet each other, and to have the dignity of going on the streets and make a protest. And also was even more beautiful that the International Criminal Court received the victims, received their files, received their solicitudes. And we found then a justice organization open for victims, that which it was also very positive. And of course, we prepare some cases to bring into the prosecutor office. And these cases we were pursuing to demonstrate the connection between environmental crimes and the connection of these with the crimes against humanity, because we believe in a way that this root of conflict has not been yet approached by the prosecutor. And we hope then from now on that the concept of the prosecutor about the case of Colombia, she can include this aspect of the conflict in their action. So I would just say that.
Thank you for responding to that question, Alexander. And Sarah, we have a question for you from our audience. The question comes from Muslim youth peace builders across the world. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing your work in Gambia. Really enriching. What are the efforts currently undertaken to bring to justice the former Gambian president, and how have victims been consulted? Sarah, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Now we can. Yeah. Did you hear the
great.
question from Muslim youth peace builders across the world?
Yes, I did hear the question. I had started to answer when you said you couldn't hear me. So we did consult the victims just right from the beginning, and the actions that have been taken so far is that in the Gambia, AIDS-Free World has supported the victims to file a civil suit against former President, among other things, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment for what he subjected them to through the bogus HIV cure. Another thing is AIDS-Free World has been working in partnership with the University of Notre Dame's Eck Institute for Global Health and the University of the Gambia to look into what was the impact of what Jammeh did, right? So that's a little bit of truth for people. to understand further beyond the surface of what they saw. Well, what did his actions do to the people that were subjected to his abuses? And it was a study that was done last year and still continues now to kind of collect those voices and to kind of understand what was the impact. And the idea is that hopefully all this research would feed into the ongoing truth process that's happening now in the Gambia, to help people to understand that, you know, this crime against the people living with HIV and AIDS of the bogus cure that actually led to some deaths and led to adverse health impacts for people living with HIV is part of the greater human rights violations that were committed by Jammeh and his administration. And the victims have been actively involved by sharing their stories and by also availing themselves to bring more attention to an issue that was not recognized. In the Gambia, there is a victim center for for Gambian human rights violations that has been formed, and the victims that we are working with particularly are part of that. But there's also a broader community of victims that has been pushing for their recognition, that have had a voice, Alexander, like what you were talking about, that the importance of having a voice in the political sphere. And I think this particular organization has been really strong in having a voice to make sure that victims' issues are not left to the wayside, whether it's to do with enforced disappearances, whether it's to do with how the Truth Commission carries out its work, making sure that that information is widely available. So that's where the work is now, that the case is still ongoing, and we're hoping that it will move along quickly to the benefit of the victims themselves.
Thanks for responding to that question, Sarah. I'm just trying to check in with Christian. Do we have any more commentary or questions from our audience on today? In the meantime, I do like to ask you, so you both underscored the importance of consulting with victims about the way they want to carry out, whether it's retribution, reparation, or restitution or whatnot. But who do you think should bear the costs, the financial burden of investigating and also really gathering all the testimonies of the victims? Who's that burden on? I think Sarah dropped off. Alexander, did you get my question?
Yeah. Well, in the Colombian case, I can say that the government is the responsible actor who make it possible for victims to organize themselves and to prepare everything in order to look for the truth, and or also to repair the damage of all these crimes. But the truth is also said that the government is almost broken because we are talking about millions of victims in Colombia. So I think the role of paying the peace process, paying everything what involves the truth, the looking for disappeared people, all these all these elements that makes the peace process possible. The government has been openly said that it's not able to pay it at all. So the former president Santos, he made really a good job finding the international community their own responsibility to subsidize, to pay this peace process. And but unfortunately, the current president elected, he's on the other way around. He's making this very difficult again, and he's pursuing to promote the commercial agenda of Colombia again, but not the agenda for peace. So now what we find out is that the victims are with nothing to cover their political movement and all the things they need to do. So now what we are helping from the ICC is that if, in a way, the ICC gets into the process of opening officially the records for for the Colombian case, we think that the court has very strong position to bring economical help for victims, for repairing, and for all the things they need to, all the things they need to cooperate and to contribute in this peace process. So that's what we are pursuing now. So if the criminal court moves fast, we maybe can see in this generation at least that we can receive more funds to make it possible.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think we lost Sarah on the call. Let me just check in with. Yeah, we lost her. Okay. I'm cautious of the time.
Oh, Jessica,
so
can you hear me?
we've drawn towards the end of our live call, and I checked in with Christian, and it doesn't look like we have any other queries for now. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to really thank you, Alexander, for sharing your thoughts with us today, and to you, Sarah, as well. Unfortunately, we could not have Cedric and Dumi join us from Cameroon and Serbia, but hopefully we can have another discussion to include them in our Peacemaker 360 platform. So I think we'll just leave it at that for today. And for those of you who are celebrating Easter, have a good holiday and enjoy your day. And thank you again, Alexander, for your time. And thank you to our viewers for being very loyal. And let us know what would you like our next Hot Topic series to be about. So that's it from us for today, and have a great day.
Thank you, Jessica.
Bye-bye. See you.
Bye-bye.